This morning, ESPN ranked all 32 NFL teams by their under 25 talent. The top four are all AFC. Eight of the top nine are all AFC. So the AFC is the younger conference, the younger talent. Some of these are just bad teams that are rebuilding. What made me laugh is the bottom two teams are my two favorites for the Super Bowl. The Patriots are 31, and the Eagles are 32. So the teams I like to end up playing in the Super Bowl. And by the way, my dark horse team in the NFL this year, the Tennessee Titans, is 29th. So they don't have any good young players outside of Corey Davis either. So I think young players are good. I think Cleveland's number one, by the way. Colts number two. Chiefs number three. Houston number four. I like all those teams. Those teams are all winning record teams. I mean, I think Kansas City could go 13-3. I think Indy and Kansas City could be, like 13-win teams. But a lot of them are not very good. That's why they have all the young talent, because they've been bad and they got good draft picks. All right, Big Noon Kickoff is going to debut August 31st. That's going to be Urban Meyer, Reggie Bush, Brady Quinn, Matt Leinart, Rob Stone. Urban Meyer, 3 national championships, 12-3 in bowl games, is part of that show, and he is joining us now via the Coward Global Satellite Network. All right, let's start with this. So we get into camp, Coach. How long is it easier for a coach at this time of the year to spot your weaknesses or to spot your strengths? What jumps out in the first 3 weeks of practices? The, oh, my God, we're in trouble here. Oh, my Lord, we're really good here.
I was at practice the other day, and the transition or the difference between training camp many, many years ago, even 10 years ago to now, 5 years ago to now, that these players have actually been getting coached all summer. So it's a much different training camp than I remember. There's no more two-a-day practices. Most of the fundamentals have been worked on all summer. You're not trying to get them in shape because they've been here all summer. So, and for most teams, and I know Ohio State and a lot of teams have worked on scheme all summer. So you have a pretty good feel going into it. Right now, I would say, especially because you've been around your players all summer, as long as you stay healthy, you have a pretty good indication what kind of team you have. And the one challenge you have is, what kind of toughness is there?
Right.
Practices have changed. You don't just see the physicalness that you used to see just because of health of players, and you want to make sure you get them to the dance or the first game.
When you were at Ohio State, the rest of us, we're fans. We kind of look at a schedule and we go, okay, these games feel like ours. These games are trouble spots. How do you focus on the moment and the practice when you know your players can go to the internet, look at schedules? Do you struggle with that nowadays, the social media aspect, creating urgency when everybody's always looking ahead?
Absolutely, especially a place like Ohio State where the social media and just media in general, you build players up. They're highly recruited players when actually they haven't done a whole lot. And so I would always, my approach is make practices as hard as possible. I used to tell them, I said, if you're worrying about anything other than survival and making it to the next day, because we're going to practice really hard. So that was my way of same thing during the season of practice. That was our way of making sure that there was focus and intention on detail and win the moment now, not worried about down the road or who you're playing. So when you're at a program like a Clemson, like Ohio State, Alabama, Oklahoma, Georgia, where you're going to be favored in maybe all your games or maybe up to one, that's the approach that we had, and that is certainly a concern.
By the way, speaking of concerns, players do have more power today. This is the world we live in has changed. As you said, you don't have two-a-days. Players don't hit as much. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's just a new challenge for coaches. You and I were at a dinner not long ago with Tom Izzo, and he talked about players transferring and players leaving early and how it's harder to build culture. There's a little bit of momentum. Jim Harbaugh talked about it this week about players skipping bowl games. Do you worry about that going forward for the sport?
I worry about it big time. I remember Denzel Ward came to me a couple years ago before the Cotton Bowl, and I heard about it. I never had to deal with it. This certainly isn't an opportunity to say that I disagree with him, because when you start talking about Nick Bosa's and top 10 picks like Denzel Ward, and I hate to say this, but I understand it. I not necessarily agree with it, but I certainly understand it. Am I worried about? I worry about the non-playoff bowl games. and we were very concerned. We went to the Rose Bowl. Are you kidding me? Ohio State going to the Rose Bowl, only second time in the last 25 years, the legendary bowl game. And I was very concerned that when we didn't make the playoffs that we would have players sit out. We did not have that. I know other teams had at times, even the New Year's Six bowl games, the big bowl games, players would sit out. That's very alarming to me. And I'm not necessarily about the future of the game, but I mean, that's something we all have to be aware of. And it's when you say the word team, finish what you start. And so I'm very concerned about that.
Yeah. By the way, Dabo Swinney, I think he's incredibly likable. Maybe it's the Southern twang. I think everything Dabo says makes me laugh. I find him incredibly likable. And yesterday he came out, and I don't think it was the way he said it was incredibly charming. He said, Alabama was tired. That's why they lost to us. They won their games by 33 points. We won ours by 20. You couldn't be tired. You had 6 weeks to prepare for it. But I do think he underscored an issue I have. And this is not to pick on Nick Saban, who I think we both think is an amazing coach. And I like Nick. I've talked to him many times. But I do think there is this theme constantly that the SEC is so great that, oh, Lord, you can't play a ninth conference game. You got to have buys. You got to play cupcakes. Is it possible you can be two things at once? You could be the best conference, but we could be overstating how rigorous it is in the SEC.
There's no question. I spent 6 years of my life in the SEC. There is a absolute truth, though, that from the top to bottom, that is the best conference. That's, you don't have a gimme. A game that you think that you're going to go in, you just roll out the ball and you're much better than that team. That's very rare in that conference. When you start thinking about teams that maybe have struggled in the past, every one of them are very talented players. They're in the talent-rich part of the country. So I see it. At times, I put it more on the media than the coaches, that you build up a conference to be the best there is, which there's a lot of truth to that. However, we also know there's other truths. You got to go play that bowl game. And, that's why they keep score at the end of the game. If one team's better than the other, that's who wins.
Yeah. The one thing I always felt, let's be honest, Urban, the Big Ten, you can get popped in that conference. I saw you guys go to Iowa a couple years ago and struggle. There was a game against Purdue. So it's not like the Big Ten. Let's be honest about it. You were the dominant coach in the Big Ten for years. You got trapped a couple of times on Saturdays. But I don't think we look at the Big Ten as dominant as the SEC. But I'll tell you this, Urban, I think the coaching in the Big Ten now is very good. And I think you probably would admit that there were Saturdays that you were halftime of a football game and thought, we're in trouble here. Could I not say the Big Ten coaching is better than the SEC coaching, which I believe it is today?
I think that's a great question. I haven't coached in the SEC in quite a while. However, I have coached in the Big Ten, and if there's a better coach conference in the league, in the nation, I'd like to have that conversation. I just think top to bottom, the Big Ten made a decision, in 2012, when I first went in the league, that the league really you have to give the administrators credit, the league made drastic changes. They put more emphasis. Just look at there's 7 teams in the preseason top 25 in the Big Ten.
Yep.
Recruiting has really taken off over the last few years. There's investments in the stadiums and these huge arenas and the crowds. And so you have to give, first of all, Commissioner Laney, but the higher-ups in our conference, I just noticed a complete transition from 2012 to 2018-19, where you're seeing a commitment to become the best league in America.
Okay, by the way, the kid, you're the last guy I'd want to replace. Ryan Day replaces you at Ohio State. What will be the difference between an Urban camp and a Ryan Day camp?
Well, I was out there. It's very similar. It's I think I use the term elite whenever I talk about Coach Day. Practice schedules are very similar. Staff transition on defense. There's a lot of different coaches. Offensively, are very similar. It's very similar. I think there's a culture at Ohio State that is going to carry on. I think Ryan's going to add his own piece to it, and he's already done it. You can see that, and I think he's very confident in the way he goes about his business. So to answer your question, I see it being very similar.
All right. Well, Urban, you look rested. You're not going to look as rested in a month when we're putting you to work, and you got to watch 35 games on Saturday, so it's great seeing you again.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. Thanks, Colin.
You bet. Urban Meyer, big noon kickoff, Saturday, 11 Eastern on Fox. Debut is Saturday, August 31st. Listen, you can be two things at once. You can be the best conference in college football, and you can be overstated. What the SEC is, because of its intensity, is wildly dysfunctional. Wisconsin football's never really dysfunctional. LSU football, Ole Miss, Auburn, Tennessee, A&M. I mean, Florida. When's Florida not dysfunctional? So the SEC, I don't think has the best coaches.